This new Snapdragon chip is pretty good. I'm breaking up my OnePlus 11 videos, trying something just a little different with my YouTube channel. If you're getting a little lost, I've got intros and comparisons, and that's all gonna be in a OnePlus playlist that you can catch on my channel. This is just gonna be a recap of some of my performance testing on the OnePlus 11 and the new Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. More phones are gonna be showing up with this high-end chip. Man, this is gonna be a really fun year for performance mobile enthusiasts, because it's rare that we really see marketing performance gains arrive in real world tests, at least in ways that I think consumers might actually feel. So when Qualcomm or MediaTek say 30% better this and 20% better that, maybe I roll my eyes a little. But this year, we're getting better performance and better performance per watt. It's a magical combination. And we started this conversation with the iQOO 11. That's an interesting comparison point, as the iQOO and OnePlus are BBK cousins, but they come from completely different manufacturing and software teams. A quick spoiler for these results, we're more consistently seeing a generational improvement over last year's phones. I don't want to undercut that. It's something we used to see a lot from like 2015 to 2019, there'd be noticeable differences in scores year over year over year. But the last 2 years have been a little more complicated. And this year, we see a return to that kind of track record, more consistent improvements again. I like to start with Geekbench scores because synthetic, aggregated, one number benchmarks rarely help you find the best fit gadget for your needs. In CPU scores, we're seeing a 40% lead over the Pixel 7 Pro, but I wonder what will happen when we really test some real apps. Probably not going to be 40% different. Now, my biggest concern last year, we had chips that seemed built to benchmark well, but did not perform as well in practical use. In a short burst of tiny little tests, last year's phones scored great. But if you kept them running longer on one specific task, that performance tanked fast. Ditto our GPU scores. We can make some big numbers happen in a benchmark. That doesn't always mean we can sustain that performance for more than a couple of minutes of gameplay. Our first real test is video rendering in LumaFusion. We certainly don't see a 40% advantage over the Tensor. More, we see near margin of error territory wins for the Tensor 2 over the 8 Gen 2. We see about a 10 to 12% lead over the 8 Gen 1. A video transcoding test, again, Tensor takes a win in a simple project. We see the 8 Gen 2 pace the 8 Gen 1 by a little more than 10%. Lastly, for LumaFusion, I'm trying out a new video trimming test, cutting a 3-minute 4K clip down to a 2-minute clip, and the score breakdown looks about the same as we've seen with the other video tests. This is a new test that I'm running, and it's important for me as it's something that I can easily duplicate in Google Photos. So for that consumer who doesn't want to spend $20 or $30 on video editing software for their phone, I think the first app a lot of folks would turn to is the built-in Photos app on a lot of Android devices. Google Photos is a terrible app for average consumers. It's slow, it's inconsistent, it's difficult to edit with. Those tools are really clumsy and hard to use. And did I mention that it's slow? It's especially poorly optimized for Google's flagship phones. So cutting the same clip in Photos compared to LumaFusion's excellent tools and fantastic rendering engine, the slowest phone in Luma is faster than the fastest phones in Google Photos. Quick tangent, if Google wants people to feel like their expensive Android phones are worth it, they should really improve their Photos app. A key Google service on a branded Google app used on a premium Google phone with an in-house designed Google chip should not be this slow at a simple video trim. But I digress. This is a video about the OnePlus 11. I couldn't help that. All right, moving to a podcast, Mixdown Audio Evolution has scaled really well with recent SoC generations, and we see improvements again moving to the 8 Gen 2. It's always interesting to me how different phones made by different companies can slot in with different strengths and weaknesses, even if all the hardware bits are pretty similar. Again, the Tensor squeaks in with a solid mid-pack performance. As an audio nerd though, I can't really complain because all of these phones demonstrate excellent performance. Mixing down a multi-track hour-long podcast in under 2 minutes. The 8 Gen 2s are at the top of that list, but with roughly a 10% difference between the iQOO flavor and the OnePlus flavor. If you told me 10 years ago that I'd be able to mix audio like that on a pocket computer, I would have laughed at you. This to me is still like magic. Pardon the interruption, but we've got to thank this video's sponsor, who is you. Videos on this channel would literally not be possible without the amazing support of the folks over on patreon.com/somegadgetguy. Just an amazing crew of people that are not only supporting production on this channel, but are also contributing to conversations. They're really keeping me on my toes. A really fun community of tech pals that join the conversation and ask interesting questions that help me produce other types of videos. We never want support to feel like a burden. I personally can't financially support all of my favorite content creators, so any effort someone can make is greatly appreciated. If you're sharing videos on social media, you're subscribing and smashing bell icons, if you're posting to the appropriate subreddits, every little bit helps in helping us build a community of people that really enjoy these kinds of tech conversations. But if you have the means and you would like to contribute at a higher level, I really would appreciate you checking out the Patreon. I'm writing up production diaries, behind the scenes posts. It's where I start all of my performance testing. It's where I'm going to be hosting all of my camera conversations and camera technical deep dives, early access for some of my videos, top tier patrons get a copy of my photography book, and the private Discord, which has kind of just become my favorite place to hang out, what with all of the craziness happening in social media. Once again, patreon.com/somegadgetguy. Thank you so much for everybody who makes the effort to share and support and contribute to their favorite content creators. And now, let's get on to the rest of the video. All right, back to another synthetic test. RAR tracks how much data it can squeeze through a phone's CPU. We see a startling gain with the 8 Gen 2 over the 8 Gen 1, and the Tensor's fallen just about 3% behind the 8 Gen 1s. But really running a large compression test through the OnePlus 11 falls to nearly the bottom of the pack. It's an outlier performance where the CPU management is handling the phone in a way that was really unexpected for me. This is a test that runs long enough for us to assume we'd see some thermal throttling, but I think the results here point to something else. It's not that the phone is running so hot that it's slowing down. I'm worried that it's managing the app before it gets to sort of a performance crisis. Case in point, the iQOO with the same chip finishes first by a significant margin, but finished warmer to the touch than the OnePlus 11. All right, now getting into our last work tests, the most brutal bench that I run is batch processing 200 raw files from a standalone full-frame mirrorless camera to not only time how fast a phone can finish, but also how much it might slow down over a sustained task. In total time, the new phones are at the top of the list where we would expect. The OnePlus takes a significant lead, and now the iQOO is delivering a surprisingly slower score. I break up this test into two halves. The OnePlus's second batch of 100 photos is faster than the iQOO's first 100 photo batch, which is incredibly fast. And we see that slowdown between first and second 100 batches of photos well maintained on both new phones. 6% slowdown is really good for a test like this. The iQOO 9 Pro looks like a solid option in this test for an 8 Gen 1. It only slowed down 8%, but it also started the slowest of all the phones on this chart, and it still slowed down by around 8%. So phones make all these crazy decisions when they're managing performance, power draw, and the thermal load of the internal components. Some phones will let some tasks run faster and warmer. Other phones might slow down more aggressively than they really need to. Gaming is an excellent example of this in action. OnePlus has traditionally limited their GPUs to 60 frames per second gaming at best. And if things are getting warm, the OnePlus 10 Pro will scale down to 30 frames per second pretty quick. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It looks worse than it really might be in practice. We saw last year on Samsung and Xiaomi, if you let the frame rate scale up higher, it can often crash harder. You might get a good average frame rate, but you'll see these noticeable and really distracting swings with a crazy high peak frame rate and then a hard drop to a lowest frame rate. I'd personally rather keep a more consistent frame rate, but that can be frustrating when you know the phone should be capable of delivering a bit more. There are some games on this Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 that I really feel should be able to crank up a little bit higher. One of my favorite games to look at is Undead Horde. This is a cute little arcadey unit management game, and it can run phones really hard, keeping up with all the minion on screen. At max graphics, after 30 minutes of gameplay, the OnePlus 11 can keep an average frame rate nearly 30% higher than the OnePlus 10 Pro. And the 10 Pro screen is noticeably warmer to the touch. Another game I like to test is Bright Ridge. It's an older game, but has PC-like graphics options to adjust. At max graphics settings in years past, 1080p gaming has been difficult to demonstrate at higher frame rates. A lot of phones couldn't hang even at 1080p. Now on the HN2, we have our first phones that stay nicely above 30 frames per second on average with maxed graphics at 1440p resolution. That's a big generational improvement. And that's about where we should wrap this conversation up. Tracking this data since my days at Pocketnow, we always expect gains, but usually they're a lot more modest than the marketing would often promise. And for the last 2 years, we've seen phones deliver the biggest, hugest synthetic benchmark scores. The real world conversation was not the same. It was a lot more nuanced. This year feels more on point. Some noticeable performance improvements in real apps, and with more reasonable power draw than last year, coming in running a lot cooler. Competition is the name of the game. We can look at the Pixel. The Tensor doesn't benchmark very impressively, but it hangs with these Qualcomm chips in really interesting ways. And I think for that next video, we should break down a comparison between the OnePlus 11 and the Pixel 7 Pro. I mean, we could take a look at a battle of the alternative brands. I think that could be fun. As always, thanks so much for watching, for sharing these videos, subscribing to the channel. All of the support lately has been absolutely fantastic. Those of you who are sharing and subscribing and smashing bell icons. Maybe you're checking out my home site, somegadgetguy.com, shopping a little merch, or you're joining the list of names scrolling by on your screen from my Patreon, patreon.com/somegadgetguy. This list is basically the coolest collection of tech pals in the multiverse. True story. So I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet, at somegadgetguy on the Twitters and the Twitch, spending a little bit more time on the Flickrs and the Mastodons. Mastodon has been a lot of fun lately, and not so much on the Facebooks or the Instagrams, and I will catch you all on the next video.